guides, he measured in at exactly 7 feet and a lean 225 pounds before turning pro. He was, by all physical measures, a scout's absolute dream. By the spring of 1986, the national accolades were steadily piling up. According to NCAA basketball archives, he earned Associated Press third-team All-American honors, cementing his name right at the top of every general manager's wish list. He possessed the kind of generational, undeniable talent that made front offices think about raising championship banners. The narrative was calm, focused, and completely centered on his limitless ceiling. But television reports from local affiliates at the time occasionally hinted at a different vibe off the floor. Reporters noted a laid-back demeanor that sometimes crossed the line into a concerning lack of urgency. And right there is where the tension starts. Why did the scouts see him as a franchise savior, yet executives were already whispering behind closed doors? Who was hanging around the young star when things started to change behind the scenes? The talent was blinding, but the environment around him was quietly shifting. On draft night, his name was called exactly where the experts expected, but the Phoenix front office would soon realize the player they just heavily invested their future in was already slowly drifting away from the game. When the summer rolled around, the stage was set for a superstar entry into the league. According to official NBA draft records, on June 17, 1986, the Phoenix Suns selected William Bedford 6th overall in the first round. This was a draft class loaded with history, and Phoenix genuinely believed they had just secured the anchor for their front court for the next decade. They brought him to the desert expecting immediate dominance and long-term stability. But what they got was a player hitting an invisible, baffling wall almost immediately. His rookie campaign was not a complete disaster, but it was nowhere near the explosive debut everyone anticipated. During the 1986 to 1987 season, he averaged 6.7 points and 4.9 rebounds, playing exactly 19.6 minutes a night, according to historical NBA stat databases. That right there is the documentary beat that raises eyebrows in hindsight. 19.6 minutes. Why did those minutes stay capped right at 19 per night for a highly touted top 10 pick on a struggling team? Why couldn't a uniquely gifted 7-footer break into the starting lineup and command the floor the way his college tape suggested he would? In interviews years later, people around the situation claimed his focus reportedly began drifting away from the hardwood. The fire and the hunger just were not there. The Suns were watching their prized investment float through professional games. What changed after that season ended that made Phoenix give up on a top-tier prospect so incredibly quickly? The front office did not wait for him to develop. Instead, after just one underwhelming rookie campaign, the Suns made a sudden trade that sent him packing, shipping him directly into the most physically intimidating locker room in the history of the league. Dropping William Bedford into Detroit in the late 80s was like putting a quiet kid in the middle of a heavy metal concert. The Pistons were aggressively building their infamous bad boys identity, a culture built on sweat, sharp elbows, and relentless physical intimidation. Bedford, reportedly known for a passive, easygoing personality, was suddenly sharing a locker room with some of the most intense, demanding competitors the game has ever seen. The culture clash was immediate, and the results on the court were glaringly obvious. During the 1987 to 1988 season, historical NBA box scores showed he appeared in 38 games but recorded exactly 0 starts. Think about that drop-off. A wildly skilled former lottery pick could not crack the starting 5 on a regular basis. According to official league statistics, his playing time plummeted to a mere 7.8 minutes per game. And that is where the story pivots hard. How does a uniquely skilled 7-footer completely lose his spot in the rotation at exactly the moment his team needed front court depth for a grueling title run? Sports media coverage at the time framed it mostly as a coach's decision, focusing on his lack of sheer physicality in the paint. But behind the scenes, disturbing rumors began to follow him through the tunnel. As some outlets claimed later, his off-court lifestyle was reportedly escalating into a destructive dependency, pulling him further into the shadows while his teammates battled under the bright lights of the playoffs. The frustrating lack of minutes and the benchings would soon be entirely forgotten because a devastating off-court revelation was about to drop, one that would completely erase a massive chunk of his athletic prime. The late 80s marked a heavy shift in how the league handled off-court behavior. Executives were desperate to clean up the public image of the sport, instituting strict, unforgiving policies regarding banned substances. William Bedford found himself caught directly in the middle of that sweeping crackdown. Instead of battling in the paint with the toughest big men in the Eastern Conference, he was quietly removed from the locker room entirely. It was a dark, isolating period that sharply contrasted with the rowdy, defiant culture his teammates were building on the floor. According to major sports media reports from the era, he was suspended and entered mandatory rehabilitation under the league's anti-drug program during the late 1980s. He completely disappeared from the professional basketball radar. The factual anchor here is jarringly absolute. During the 1988 to 1989 season, official NBA season rosters show he logged exactly 0 minutes and 0 games played. He was not injured in the traditional sense, he was just gone. Reporters noted at the time that the Pistons barely missed a beat without him, forging ahead to capture the franchise's very first title. And that presents a painful contradiction. While the city of Detroit threw a massive parade, filled the streets with confetti, and celebrated their bad boys, why did the story of their former lottery pick suddenly stop being just about basketball? He was a member of the organization, yet entirely disconnected from its greatest triumph. The league eventually cleared him to return to the gym the following year, but the player who stepped back onto the hardwood was essentially a ghost in his own uniform. Returning to a team that just won a championship without you is a complex psychological burden. When Bedford rejoined the active roster for the 1989 to 1990 season, the Pistons were on a mission to repeat. They had their rotation, they had their stars, and they had their identity. Bedford was given a uniform, but his role was reduced to something barely recognizable for a former standout prospect. During that regular season, basketball archives show he averaged just 2.8 points in 5.9 minutes per game. It was a calm, uneventful stretch of basketball, mostly because he was barely allowed to play it. Court records and box scores from that era paint a clear picture. His appearances were strictly limited to deep garbage time, stepping onto the floor only when the game was already entirely decided. When the postseason arrived, the pattern held firm. According to official NBA playoff statistics, he appeared in 5 playoff games during the spring 1990 run, logging an average of only 3.8 minutes a night. He secured a championship ring that summer, standing on the podium with the rest of the team. But television coverage at the time focused on the core rotation, leaving him in the blurred background of the celebration. What changed in his public image after that season, when fans realized the once feared, highly drafted center was now functioning as a human victory cigar? He was a champion on paper, but the reality was far hollower. Just as the basketball world agreed, he was a complete bust. He walked onto the court on a Tuesday night and did something so surreal, it ended up permanently etched in the league record books. Every once in a while, a player completely lost in the rotation does something that reminds everyone exactly why they were drafted in the first place. For Bedford, that moment came during an otherwise standard regular season matchup against the Seattle Supersonics. It was a brief, fascinating outlier that broke the downward spiral of his career narrative. Instead of showcasing his interior defense or rebounding, he displayed the exact unique skill that made him a Memphis legend years earlier. On November 6, 1990, historical NBA box scores show he stepped onto the court and shot a perfect 3 for 3 from deep. According to documented league records, he achieved a bizarre and highly specific milestone that night. He logged the fewest minutes played in a game, exactly one single minute, while making 3 or more three-pointers. To see a 7-foot center-drain long-range shots with that kind of rapid-fire efficiency in 60 seconds was completely unheard of in that era of basketball. In retrospectives, basketball historians often point to this game as the ultimate tease. It was a documentary beat that proved the raw, elite talent was still buried somewhere inside him. But why did that impossible flash of shooting surface on that exact night, only to completely vanish the very next morning? It was a statistical anomaly that generated a quick headline, but it changed absolutely nothing about his standing with the coaching staff. That single minute of magic was a fantastic trivia answer, but it could not stop the inevitable reality that his days on a guaranteed NBA payroll were rapidly running out. The slow fade out of the major leagues is rarely a dramatic spectacle. Usually the phone just stops ringing. For Bedford, the descent began during his final years in Detroit, where his playing time continued to dwindle into absolute irrelevance. The franchise that once hoped he could provide crucial front-court depth eventually moved on, quietly trading him to the San Antonio Spurs. This change of scenery offered a clean slate, but instead of a revitalization, it marked the definitive end of his NBA run. According to NBA archival stats, during the 1992 to 1993 season, he played his final 16 games for San Antonio, averaging a career-low 4.1 minutes a night. He was an afterthought on the roster, offering virtually zero impact on the floor. When it was all said and done, official player summaries show he finished his 238-game career averaging just 4.1 points per game. That is a staggering statistical collapse for a player selected 6th overall in a legendary draft class. Reporters noted at the time that his departure from the league happened with almost no media fanfare. He simply faded from the transaction wires. But when the Spurs quietly let him go, did the front office already know the off-court rumors were escalating into serious trouble? The massive guaranteed contracts were officially gone, and desperate to keep his professional athletic lifestyle afloat, he took his basketball shoes to the minor leagues, facing a harsh financial reality as the NBA checks entirely dried up. Life in the minor leagues is a brutal reality check for a former first-round millionaire. Gone were the chartered flights, the luxury hotels, and the massive packed arenas. Instead, Bedford found himself riding buses through the heartland of America, trying to salvage an athletic identity that was rapidly slipping through his fingers. It was a humbling, grinding environment that offered very little financial security and even less public attention, firmly grounding the story in the tough realities of the Continental Basketball Association. According to minor league basketball archives, he signed and played briefly for the Oklahoma City Cavalry in 1993. His time there was fleeting, and later that same year, CBA player records show he transitioned to the Grand Rapids Hoops. These professional stints were incredibly short, exceptionally quiet, and completely devoid of the spotlight he had known since his dominant college days in Memphis. Minor league press coverage from that season barely mentioned his arrival, treating him more like a passing curiosity than a returning star trying to mount a comeback. And that sudden loss of structure creates a deep, lingering tension. Who was truly around him when the final minor league buzzer sounded, leaving him with no team, no schedule, and absolutely no immediate income? Without the daily demands of practices and formal games, the former phenom slid directly into a dangerous lifestyle that local law enforcement was already beginning to watch. When the roar of the crowd completely disappears, the silence can be devastating. The mid to late 1990s presented a massive, terrifying void for Bedford. Without the anchor of professional basketball to structure his days, the destructive dependency that had previously derailed his prime years reportedly escalated. He was no longer just a struggling former athlete, he was rapidly becoming a man entangled in the criminal justice system, shifting the narrative squarely into public records. According to public court records, between 1996 and 1997, he was arrested twice for the possession of illegal substances. These were lower-level offenses, but they established a clear, documented pattern of a life spinning dangerously out of control. In retrospective interviews recorded in the late 1990s, he openly admitted to struggling deeply with the transition away from the court, completely unable to replace the high-stakes thrill of professional sports with a stable civilian routine. Court records showed that these initial run-ins resulted in relatively mild legal consequences, keeping him out of long-term lockup. But why did the legal system initially grant him that leniency? And what changed behind the scenes to make his next encounter with the police a national news story? Those early misdemeanor charges were merely warning signs, because the operation he reportedly drove into just a few years later would irrevocably alter the rest of his life. The transition from a struggling former athlete to a man entangled in high-stakes legal trouble happened on a routine stretch of highway. It was the massive turning point of his story, shifting his public profile overnight from a troubled former player to an accused trafficker. According to public police documents, the situation escalated rapidly during a traffic stop in Michigan in the year 2001. This was not a minor citation for personal possession. According to major sports media reports, he was accused of transporting exactly 25 pounds of illegal marijuana across state lines. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on the staggering scale of the arrest, broadcasting his mugshot nationally and sending a shockwave through the sports world. The sheer volume of the contraband discovered in the vehicle elevated the narrative from a sad story of dependency into a massive federal issue. It was a jarring contrast to his early days in Memphis. How does a man who once guarded Patrick Ewing and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar under the bright arena lights end up running bulk contraband down a Midwestern interstate? The sports media immediately painted a picture of a broken superstar desperately trying to fund a lifestyle that had evaporated a decade earlier. He found himself at the center of serious allegations, surrounded by lawyers instead of coaches. But incredibly, even while facing the terrifying reality of federal prison time and mounting legal bills, he found himself entirely unable to hit the brakes. The standard legal strategy after a massive highway bust is to lay low, show absolute remorse, and beg the court for leniency. Instead, his situation deteriorated even further. The severe personal crisis that had shadowed his entire adult life entirely eroded his judgment, leading to the rapid collapse of whatever legal leverage his defense attorneys might have held. He was out on bail, but he could not stay away from the lifestyle that had just ruined him. After his initial arrest, court records showed he was apprehended 2 additional times for similar marijuana offenses, while his previous case was still highly active. That is the documentary beat that explains everything that followed. Court records showed that his complete inability to comply with standard bail conditions systematically destroyed any chance of a favorable plea deal. The legal system, which had granted him mild leniency in the late 1990s, was no longer willing to look the other way. In the year 2003, he finally faced a judge for his ultimate sentencing, according to television news reports. Why did a massive double-digit sentencing number surface right then? And was the judge actively making an example of a former celebrity? Some sources argued the harsh mandate was meant to send a public message, while others firmly noted that his constant repeat offenses simply forced the court's hand. The legal debate ended when the gavel came down with terrifying finality, officially issuing a 10-year mandate that would lock away the entirety of his middle-aged years. Moving from the wide-open floors of professional basketball arenas to the strict, unforgiving confines of the federal penal system is a staggering physical and psychological adjustment. For a 7-foot former athlete, there is simply no way to blend in. But there was no overblown Hollywood drama to his time inside, just the slow, quiet, heavy reality of thousands of lost days. According to public sentencing documents, he officially began serving his 10-year prison sentence in 2003, stepping entirely out of the public eye. In later interviews, he reflected on this period with a grounded calmness, noting that the extreme isolation finally forced him to confront the destructive habits he had been running from since his rookie season in Phoenix. He entered the system as a national cautionary tale, but reportedly spent his time quietly getting clean and finding a sense of discipline that had always eluded him on the basketball court. According to public records, after serving nearly his full term, he was officially released from the penal system in November 2011. What changed in his mindset during those quiet nights locked away from the world he used to rule? By his own account, the anger and the denial slowly faded, replaced by a simple desire to survive the remainder of his life without looking over his shoulder. When the heavy iron doors finally opened in the winter of 2011, he walked out into a society that had completely moved on, forcing him to rebuild his identity from absolute zero. Re-entering the world after a decade away is a monumental task, especially when your name was once synonymous with boundless athletic potential and a highly public, catastrophic fall. William Bedford chose to face his history head-on by returning exactly to where his legend started. He went back to his hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. But he did not return as the untouchable 7-foot hero from the mid-1980s. He came back carrying the heavy weight of his public mistakes, offering himself as a living, breathing cautionary tale for the next generation of local players. Regional press coverage in the commercial appeal noted at the time that he was actively trying to rebuild his life step by step. According to those regional profiles published around late 2011 and 2012, he was highly focused on living the right way and staying completely out of the troubled circles that had defined his early adulthood. The shift from federal inmate back to a respected basketball figure was quiet, slow, and deeply intentional. In major sports media reports from 2012, he was officially documented as coaching local youth basketball in the Memphis area, stepping back onto the hardwood not as a star, but as a mentor. In interviews, he said something close to this. He wanted to ensure that young players truly understood the immense, unforgiving consequences of losing focus off the court. But was it the heavy ghosts of his squandered NBA potential, or the sheer, simple relief of basic survival that finally pushed him to give back to the game? He had seen the absolute highest peaks of professional sports, collecting a championship ring with the bad boys, and he had seen the darkest, most isolating